whole country, but it may be diluted after 14 April. So, sir, let us start.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Simon, before I start, I would like to introduce you to our mentor, one more mentor, Mr. Sanjay Bhuvania. Sir, are you there? We have two mentors in Millennium MAMS.
Yeah, I am
Sir has
there.
also joined. Yes.
We
So,
welcome
Hello,
you,
Sanjay.
Mr. Simon. Yes, we welcome you, Mr. Simon, on this great talk that we expect our students to benefit from. So let us start the talk. Rachna, you will moderate.
yes, sir. And sir, Sirisha is here. Sirisha will be conducting the session. She will decide about the Q&A part. And yeah, so
Good.
yeah. Sirisha, are you there? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I'm here.
okay.
Good morning, Simon. Good morning, sirs.
Yes, good morning.
Good
Yeah.
morning.
Good morning.
So,
Yeah. So I would like to start with a quote that tough times don't last, but tough people too. And in this scenario, I mean to say, Millennium MAM's insatiable appetite for learning and being lifelong learners breaks any barriers, and we are here today to continue our session where we invite the guests of honor for sharing their experiences and opinions with us. And in these challenging times of lockdown, we start our day with our Guru, Mr. Vishnu Dhanuka's words of wisdom. And today he mentioned in his session that, quote unquote, I don't believe in coincidence. There is a divine order to the magnificent mystery of life. These lines resonate with my thoughts as well. It's not a coincidence that we have you here today, Simon. It's divine intervention. I invite you to start the session. Over to you, Simon.
Yes.
Rachna, thank you very much, and I'm honored at the opportunity. And it's one of the things which really has struck me in the last 18 months that I have been in India is how connected the country is to agriculture, and how, on the one hand, diverse the views are on agriculture, but their fundamental interest is just amazing. Yeah. And if I can just start on myself, Simon, a good 20 years in the agricultural industry, actually, by training economist and MBA. Have been for Bayer primarily running country organizations in growth markets, starting out in ex-Yugoslavia, and then moving on into Czech Republic, Slovakia. Spent 3.5 years in Southeast Asia, running the whole business from, if you like, Vietnam to Indonesia to Malaysia, living in Thailand at the time. And am now responsible for India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, where obviously India is the primary focus. And I was saying to your mentor already, I've probably seen more of the country in these 18 months than I have of any of the countries, honestly, that I've been in the last years. So it's really amazing to be here, and it's really great to have the opportunity to work with Indian farmers, which primarily are smallholder farmers, to help also the government agenda, if you like, doubling the income of farmers, which is really what Bayer is focused on with all the activities that we do here, primarily on smallholder farmers in the country. So with that, I'd like to really give you the opportunity to ask questions out of the group, which hopefully I will be competent to answer.
Yeah. Sirisha,
thank
over
you.
to you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rachna. Thank you, Simon. Let's start with all of us are students here following the sector. So as students, we'd like to understand the process of manufacturing of agrochemicals in terms of, sourcing of raw materials, intermediaries, forward and backward integration. If you could please elaborate on the manufacturing process.
Right. Manufacturing. Okay. I mean, agrochemicals are in many ways a multi-sourced commodity, if you like, very often even petrochemical based. Most agrochemical active ingredients nowadays actually come from China, which is the primary source, though India has traditionally always been also a larger production base for some of the chemistry, especially, if I may say so, some of the older chemistry. And in the last couple of years, also again with the Make in India campaign, which has been driven by Prime Minister Modi, you do see that more and more, at least higher value production moves into the country. So that means we probably still see, I would guess now 80 to 85% of active substance coming from abroad. But then the formulation, packaging, so adding value actually happens in India almost to a similar percentage. So very few products, some of the very modern chemistries or formulations might still be coming from overseas. We have one or two products coming from Germany, for example, but most is then really produced here locally in India, mainly around the Gujarat.
Okay, okay. Namita, can you come in next?
Simon, I have a question. You were talking about China. Now, in terms of what, could you just share, if it's possible for you, to the extent of Bayer's dependence on China for intermediaries? And also, subsequently, do you have any plans of increasing manufacturing of intermediaries in India?
Yeah, we actually have one of our biggest active ingredient sites that we still own ourselves here in India, which is a pyrethroid plant primarily, but moving more also into higher value insecticides, which is in Vapi. It is throughout the industry that we are somewhat dependent on China because it's just gotten to be a production center, and obviously also from a cost of goods perspective, increasingly important. When I talk to Indian colleagues here, though, the interest to also think of active production, specifically in the area of herbicides, is rising also here in India. And when I look a little bit, it's interesting. I mean, probably 10 years back, I was sitting in a headquarter position quickly in Germany, and we were looking at our cost of good position versus generic producers, and we were saying it's not a good idea that we produce so much in Germany. We should be moving more towards actually buying actives in China and then adding the value over time, either locally or even taking back to Germany, formulating and then sending across the world. That has been implemented by basically every company across the world. Now, what we saw was around the Olympics, really, that China was looking at the environmental footprint of those productions. And I mean, when you think of it, lower cost of goods normally somewhat interlinked also with production standards. Yeah. So where in Europe it became too expensive, partly because of environmental and security questions. In China, they probably took it too lax, which was also a competitive situation because India, in that sense, especially after a big accident that happened here many years ago, has been tougher on environmental standards and safety standards. This, let's say, has significantly changed in the last 2-3 years in China. A lot of plants have been shut down, not just for the Olympics to improve the situation short, but more longer term, really, which has driven both cost of goods up and therewith the, let's say, competitiveness of other countries coming back. I also see a diversification of supply chain discussion happening. Yeah, and you can link it even to the crisis that we have currently around the coronavirus or COVID-19. A lot of people are realizing that if you have a one-source strategy only, and it's the same, I mean, India is in many ways a pharmaceutical hub, but when you talk to pharmaceutical companies in India, you have a similar dependence on China in terms of the active ingredient APIs. And that is where people are rethinking at this point. So I would not be surprised that you would see also as a consequence, not just of China increasing the standards, but also geopolitical considerations, people trying to balance their sourcing more and with that de-risk their supply chains.
Thank you.
Meghna, can you come in next? Meghna?
Yeah, Simon.
Uh-huh.
Hi. So,
Amazing.
taking on from what you mentioned about how the disruption has happened currently in the supply from China because of the coronavirus, um, how has Bayer managed the scenario with the subsequent disruption in the supply of the intermediaries?
Well, I mean, so far we've been there's two or three things which are playing positively. First of all, we had 2 or 3 years of, may I say, difficult external situations, mainly around the monsoon not performing so much, which means that the country per se had good stocks of agrochemicals. Yeah? So let's say the supply disruption which happened in January when really China was shut down was rather limited. We have single active ingredients, but that's more a global topic. So per se, at this point, the concern is rather what happens in the longer term than in the short run, that we would be short on products. And as I say, we are pretty strongly India-based. That means if I look at my total sales, probably 80% of that, the value add happens in India. And since the supply chains are quite long, we tend to carry the active ingredients here already in the country. So let's say the short term is manageable and is okay. The longer term changes is a more significant one, because the regulatory frameworks define also where is your source of active ingredient. So if I tomorrow decide my source of active ingredient no longer is China, but will be India, because somebody here is either producing the active ingredient or planning to, then this is a regulatory process which takes some time in terms of getting it through the system. And that is where, if anything, a bit more of a concern lies, whether we could do this in time after potentially a strong Kharif season that we might be seeing, given, let's say, early weather projections.
Right. Thank you.
Rashna?
Yeah, Simon, I would like to ask you that since this time of the year is off season for agrochemical sector and the monsoons have been pretty good last year, how much will it impact the balance sheet of the company? And also looking at the present situation, what do you think will be the impact? And do you see any dependency on the monsoon coming down given the increase in irrigation facilities? What's your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, Indian agriculture is and will continue to be dependent on water and weather, and with that, the monsoon. You're right, the monsoon in terms of volume was good last year, though it was late, and it was also in terms of distribution not always perfect, never is, but let's say there was impacts during the monsoon time, and let's say the what we call liquidation. So the usage of agrochemicals was actually a bit lower than what you would have thought, given the environment.
Right.
That has fed into strong Rabi sale. So the Rabi was very strong also in case when you compare it with last year, where we had very low water levels, groundwater levels, generally very dry season. So if you look across the country at this point, be it vegetables, but also the field crops, tend to be in a much better condition than they were last year. Yeah? So to that point, the fourth quarter of the season would have been rather good for agriculture. And these last, whatever it is, 15, 20 days lockdown, if anything, have slowed things, but are not going to be destroying the picture overall.
Okay.
What is more concerning at this point is the whole disruption of logistics. And with that, what we are seeing is there's a huge risk to farm profitability. So what I've been hearing this morning is that, for example, corn prices have literally nosedived because people are not finding anybody taking the corn, which is still manageable in terms of corn being storable, but it is with perishables a bigger issue. So some of the tomato crop, right now, we're really concerned whether people will be able to sell it at a proper price.
Okay. So impact on balance sheet, you don't think it will be so much? Like
Immediate not. But again, the question is how long will this last? And if we were to find this lasts into the Kharif, and we would see the supply disruptions that we see at this point, there's no trucks. There's literally also, and you know how it is in India, the federal government says A, the state government says B, and the local police understand C. So we have agro inputs, be it seeds, fertilizers, but also chemicals on the essential list. So in that sense, we have exemptions from lockdown, but that doesn't mean that we're really able to move products about, which could have, again, longer term effects. Right now is not the crop season.
Okay, thank you.
Sonali Sonpal, can you come in with your question?
Hi, Simon.
Hi.
Simon, as you said that you've been here in India past 18 months. So in that time, have you been in touch with the government to get into any partnership to drive the technology like drones and proper irrigation?
Yes, it's probably one of the realizations that we as Bayer have had in the last, given 18 months since we had change of management, myself, but also Dina Ryan coming back to India. And we have been extensively talking to the government, which probably in the past we've not done so much for whatever reasons. And the realization is, especially when you're looking at advancing modern technology, you need to be cooperating with the government. So when you look at drones per se, or anything which flies is highly regulated in India to the point of actually not being allowed. And to, let's say, diffuse the fears, but also deal with certain concerns that are there, you need to be starting at a high level. And that's why there is discussions with governments, and specifically then also in some states, and the universities, and trying to get literally private-public partnerships together that say, okay, the technology has proven to be extremely helpful and good for farmers. Now we need to find ways and means how to make it also viable in India. Yeah? So that's definitely happening. On the irrigation side, we are working with people like Netafilm, but also with Jane to drive it further. And I know the government is heavily behind it. There's big subsidy schemes in many states also on it. So irrigation is definitely something which is extremely important, and where we also try to help in terms of application. And literally, I mean, the question is always, how do you make sure the farmer gets most profit out of what he does? And there is risks or concerns around the fact that in India, water is still perceived to be free. But I think especially the last 2 years of drought, or 3 years of drought, literally, or late monsoon, have shown to farmers that water is maybe not as easily and cheaply available as it used to be. At least it costs diesel to pump now. So let's say support for irrigation is coming up as well, especially drip irrigation.
Thank you.
Drip irrigation. Okay. Thank you. Srinidhi, please come in.
Hi, Simon.
Hi.
So I wanted to ask for an MNC like Bayer, where you have the backing of a global R&D. So how do you need to have specialized R&D for a country like India to adapt to the Indian conditions and to use the local farming methods, or does the global R&D help you here?
It's a very fair question. And first of all, I would like to just make one statement, which is extremely important to me. Bayer in India is a very Indian company. We have here, direct and indirectly, more than 12,000 people employed. We're listed at the stock exchange. Maybe some of you even invest in the company. More than 40% of our stock actually is free floating, or was free floating. I think it's now 36 to be exact. So we have a high degree of localization. We have more than 120 years history and more than 50 years even of being this listed entity here. So Bayer in India is a very Indian company. I'm actually one of two only foreigners in the company at this point. Yeah, just to make that point, because I have found that this discussion, multinational versus local, is something which is quite emotionally discussed here in India, and I find the perception is sometimes wrong. Yeah. Now, what we do have is we are owned by a multinational company to a large extent, and that means we can tap into the global research, absolutely right. Do we do a specific chemical research just for India is probably not the case, because just in terms of you need to really approach it from a global perspective, but have we driven especially insecticide projects just or primarily for India? Yes, is absolutely the case. Yeah, and where we are today really focusing in is on the topic of smallholders. So India is actually the country which is the center of our global smallholder farming for Bayer. And if you look at what Bayer has done just at the end of last year, we've gone out as a company globally and said, we will be focusing on the reduction of our carbon footprint by 30%. We are going to be reducing also the environmental impact of our chemicals by 30%, and we will be uplifting the lives of 100 million farmers. Now, when you look at 100 million smallholder farmers, then this only goes with India. So in that sense, a lot of the R&D, especially on business models for smallholders, is actually now focused on India and will be piloted, if you like, and then scaled in India to then be implemented also be in my own area in Southeast Asia. But obviously then Africa being the next frontier where you really say there's a lot of smallholders which need support. Yeah. So business model, yes. Specific chemical research is rather if we find a compound that would be very good for these type of markets and then drive it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Sushila, can you go in with your question?
Hi, Simon. As we know,
yes, Sushila, you're audible.
We can hear you.
As we know, COVID-19 is a worldwide emergency situation which is disrupting the entire supply chain of the world. With agrochemicals being an essential commodity having few substitutes, how do you plan to meet the current demand and making it available to your customers amidst to lockdown?
Yeah. I mean, our advantage, and I was telling the number of people, I mean, we have more than 3,500 people which are working for us in the field, which is one of the few companies that has such a footprint in the country. Now, despite the fact that they're in lockdown, actually what we try to do is go a little bit more digital where digital is possible, but at this point it's a lot really with phone calls. So we are the first company, at least that's the feedback we get from farmers, who's starting to call farmers, and we have a database of more than 3 million farmers which we consider as really consistent users of our product, and checking in on them, and honestly right now checking in on more on their safety and on giving them some hygiene tips than the pure, may I call it, sales pitch. Because the concern right now is more, can I sell my produce? Is a Monday opening or not? But what we're doing as well is we're dealing with people like Big Basket or AgroBazaar and similar, and say, can we help you link with farmers where we know that they have produce ready to sell, especially perishables? But we're also talking to companies like ITC and say, can we help you link at this point for the upcoming wheat harvest in the Punjab and these type of things. So that's where we're actively dealing. And I was just talking to the guys in the East, and they were telling me since Tuesday last week, they have been contacting more than 19,000 farmers just in the area of Bengal and basically the Seven Sisters, Assam, etc. Up there and checking in with them and trying to help them also overcome the issues. We have essential commodity status. Farm shops are allowed to open, but often the local police will not allow that to happen. So we're looking at even, let's say, farm door delivery and these type of services, although they're obviously still very small scale.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Right. Swati Chaudhary. Swati, yeah.
Swati, I think you're muted.
Swati, you're not audible.
No.
Swati, you're not audible. Swati,
Let's go
you're
to
not
the
audible.
let's go to Jyoti
Okay.
and then we'll come back to Swati.
Okay, let's go to Jyoti. Jyoti, can you come in?
Yeah. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Jyoti.
Yeah. So my question is regarding Agri Bazaar, which you just talked about. So we had a chance. We actually had a meeting with Mr. Amit Agarwal of Agri Bazaar in during our agrochemical sector meet in January. So right now, Bayer is planning to partner with Agri Bazaar. So I would like to know how this collaboration is going to help the farmers and also the agrochemical sector. And my second question is regarding the hybrid seeds and the genetically modified seeds. Why is it not catching up in India? What are the challenges that you're facing? Yeah.
Okay, let me try the first one. I mean, in many ways, what you do see is that when we talk about digital interactions for farmers, we find that the biggest value we can add is the market linkage,
Okay.
right? Despite the fact that we have minimum intervention prices, that we have here or there also organized mandis and increasingly also FPOs coming up, the farmer's concern normally is where can he sell his produce at a reasonable price and maybe has also that price transparency. And we find on the other side very often that consolidators like be it even Reliance Fresh or so, sometimes don't get the quality at the volumes that they need. Yeah? So linking the farmer to an off-taker is really something where we believe in terms of adding value to the farmer, helping him with his profits is one of the biggest needs that we have in a country like India due to logistics and all the issues that we all know, right? And that is the step which in the longer run will help the cash flow of the farmer and therewith also help him to, let's say, make better choices with the chemicals he uses. Because what you do find is that when you have bigger consolidators, they also look more at the quality of the produce and they will ask questions similar as you have it in even the European Union regarding residues and these type of things. Yeah? So that's a little bit the link that you would see there. And obviously with better cash flow, the farmer is just able to choose more, let's say, better products in the end as well. Yeah? So that's a little bit where this comes from. And what we have just also, again, realized is that in India, there is many startups in contrast to other countries. And supporting these startups and working with them is better than trying to build our own platform, which is sometimes the approach that multinational companies tend to take. We build the platform, it's ours, and then everybody gets on it. We find that's probably not the approach in India. We're better off looking at people that are already doing it. They often are, let's say, landlocked and a bit local, which is also the case with Agri Bazaar. So that when you say, okay, now we need somebody in the Punjab, they say, well, we're not there, but that doesn't matter. You can help them scale. And this is exactly where I think the advantage also lies for them dealing with people like us, because we have that scale across the country. We're not just in one state. Yeah. To the genetically modified, there is, it's a big topic and we could probably do a 3-hour session on it. India actually is one of the biggest adopters of genetically modified cotton, which you may all be aware of, which is the Bogart technology. It's an insect-resistant topic, and it's the insect-resistant seed, which has seen a lot of controversy, and actually this controversy, may I say so, to a certain degree, even peaked last week with the agricultural minister basically abolishing the value of the traits in a decision they made on the cotton price control order. Now, this is obviously a bit of a concern because we do believe that the trait still carries value. And we do believe that genetically modified seeds could improve the efficiency of Indian farming significantly. Yeah? Without wanting to quote too much data, but when you look at what has happened in cotton, from a crop which took a lot of at the time also highly toxic insecticides. We have seen significant reduction of chemical usage over the years, and at the same time, a lot of investment also by local Indian seed companies into germplasm, so that the Indian cotton production actually benefited quite a bit over the years. Now, unfortunately, the introduction of newer technology becomes difficult because, one, on the regulatory side, we get different indications. One person says yes, the next one says no. As I say, the value capture becomes very tricky, and what was not helpful was that there was literally only one company that really dared to go into the country, so that there was probably also too little competition to really, let's say, help spur the technology also broader and have a broader base of supporters. The concerning cotton at this point is there is quite a bit of illegal, as they call it, herbicide-tolerant cotton in the market, where we see farmers adopting it, where we obviously must have seed players distributing it, producing and distributing it. But as it is illegal, it becomes really tricky to follow up where it comes from and then how to also control it. So we are again here also in discussions with the government and offering as buyer to say we would try to help deregulate the technology if that is wanted.
Okay.
And then work also with the government on what could be a let's say a model of compensating which is less controversial than it was in the past. But as I say, it's highly politicized. I think what we'll be seeing more is that also in surrounding countries, the competitive pressure will come up. China has just recently deregulated genetically modified organisms also for corn. We have a huge issue in India coming up with fall armyworm, which is very difficult to control pest, where genetically modified seeds could be one of the solutions. So it's really a question of is academia and the government generally supportive of the technology or not, and only then can you come into a sensible discussion on saying, does it make sense to try to introduce such technology in India? As I say, it's highly controversial from our perspective. Obviously, the value is extremely high, and we do believe that it could help, especially also, if you like, in oil crops to lead to self-sufficiency of the country. So it's not just for export and just having more cotton, but you could really see it help the country to reduce imports of edible oils, for example. It's as I say, it could be a 3-hour discussion we could have on this.
Thank you so much for the insight. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah.
Okay, Swati, I guess you're back. Yeah. No, Swati.
No.
Swati, you're not audible. Swati, you're not audible. Let's go to Preeti.
Yes,
I'll get back to you, Swati.
Hi, Simon.
Preeti, could you?
Hi,
Yeah.
Simon. Preeti. So, you've already touched upon the topic of self-sufficiency in India. So, our population has increased from 130 crore to 135 crore. And given that the land bank is same, so the only way out is to increase the yield of the seeds or the crop. So how is Bayer addressing this situation?
Yeah, Preeti, I mean, you're touching a very important point, and it's not just the crores of people, but it's also the rising middle classes. It's changing of food habits. I mean, if we look at the COVID crisis at this point, some of you may be facing this also in Calcutta. I know it's here an issue in Mumbai. Even getting fresh vegetables at this point is not so easy, right? And that might help people to realize again that this is not just an issue of the poor and rural population, but that it is a pan-India topic, that within 2 days of lockdown, all of a sudden vegetable availability, even in the greater Mumbai area, to people who can afford it, is not so easy to get. Yeah? So let's just say the awareness level has come up significantly, I believe. What we're doing, I mean, there's again 2 things to it. One is fundamental availability. The other one is also distribution very often. Who actually gets it? We can argue that India is food self-sufficient, but we all know that India has one of the highest degree of undernourished people in the world, and probably also in terms of hunger, there's still more than is absolutely necessary. So there's the issue of how do you make sure it is available and distributed correctly. And the other one is then also how do you produce more to feed into this availability. And we're probably more on the side of producing more. And here, the question is also where do you produce and what is the cost of production? Yeah. So you could be sitting and saying, if we factor in the cost of water, then you should have a different rice policy in the country than is there today. So do you want to produce more rice on less acres in areas where water availability is better? Is maybe a more important discussion than saying, oh, we need to produce even more rice, because India is both self-sufficient and also exporting. And so therefore it is very crop dependent to really have this discussion. Now we are in vegetable seeds, so if you like, producing higher quality vegetables is one of the areas that we're focusing on. We do have hybrid rice, which could help you to increase the yields, and where especially in the East we're working in areas where rice yields are very low and where higher yields actually will benefit the people there. While you could be saying in the in areas in the Punjab or so where we're looking at basmati, it's rather a question of quality and exportability, where we're trying to make sure that the maximum residue levels of agrochemicals are within reason, that you can export it to Europe, etc. And now, as I was saying, oil crops is a major topic as well. We grow a lot of soybean, but we don't grow enough to be self-sufficient on oil. Mustard is an area where in the country also a lot of controversy has been around, do you want GM mustard or not? And these are areas where I think you could quite quickly increase the yields with technology adoption, and reduce the dependability on imports as well. I hope I answer your question, Wallace.
Yes, thank you, Simon.
Yeah.
Tell me, Simon, taking this topic further, now our industry especially is plagued with a lot of fake pesticides. It's estimated about 40% of the industry, resulting in the loss of sales. So for organized players, so how does Bayer address this issue?
Yeah, I mean, there's several aspects, right? I mean, where we're talking straight out counterfeits and fakes, we obviously try, be it with the right packaging, be it also on controls, be it increasingly with more modern measures like even QR labels and breakable seals and visible and invisible seals, to get a bit of a feel for what is happening. And I'm not a big friend of quoting percentages, but it's something where you find, especially with higher value, quick turning chemicals, that this is a concern. Does it really significantly hurt my business? Probably, I would say it's twofold. The bigger concern is often there's funny stuff in those bottles, which then leads farmers to have losses. And if they believe they've bought a real product, they get a bad opinion of the company. So that's where I'm very concerned with, that people think, oh, I bought an expensive Bayer product, it doesn't work, and that feeds into an image topic. Yeah. The other one obviously is if there's dangerous chemicals in there, then there's a safety aspect which we must do everything we can to avoid any of that happening. We have a very large unregulated sector in the country, which is partly concerning me, which is what they call biopesticides, where people actually are selling rather unregulated products where you don't know where's the origin. Is it really bio? And by the way, bio doesn't necessarily mean it is not dangerous. It's in the end still meant to kill insects. You can assume that it's probably also in one way or another toxic, even if it is a bio insecticide. So their unregulated sales, often at high prices, again, where it's not clear what the farmer is really spraying, is something that concerns me a lot. There is an area where, let's say, legitimate product is being filled in smaller companies who are selling them. That's not nice. That's something where, again, I am not happy that the quality controls are not in place, but I would not see this as being now the absolute major concern. Yeah, it's really more an image thing, and it is where farmers are relying on getting something which they then don't get. That is where is a real concern.
Right.
Sirsha,
Okay.
Sirsha,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I have a question. That
Yes, sir.
is there any plan or scope for there to increase the export in a very big way?
We do quite a bit of export from India. I mean, when you have a production hub, you normally do that. Honestly, for us, we always say it's more an opportunistic business because we would normally only export out of our Bayer plants here to other Bayer companies, be it in Indonesia or Thailand. Obviously, this does not apply to Vapi, which is a active ingredient site which produces probably almost 80% of the pyrethroids globally. So all the global companies would be our customers as well. That is clearly a more export-orientated business. Do we position ourselves as a potential risk mitigator to pure Chinese supply? The answer is yes, obviously. I mean, when I look at a global production network, for Bayer, India needs to be part of the discussion, especially when we're looking at diversifying risk. So you could say that's there, but it's not something that I would personally be very involved in, because I'm obviously focusing on India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka from a commercial perspective.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bhuvani also had a question.
Yeah,
Sir?
Simon, I had just one question. With our agricultural GDP growing within the range of 2 to 4%, to grow your business, you will be focusing more on product efficiency or better penetration. Can you give us some insight on this aspect? How, from where do you see the top line coming in case of Bayer Crop Science over next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think I said one thing already, which is that we're really developing the smallholder farming strategy with a very strategic angle out of India. And that means reach. Yeah. Today, and I mean, it's always difficult to pin it down in a country like India, but I think I said in a by comment, we have about 3 million farmers in our database, and all of us know that we have 130 million farmers in the country. Now that gives you a feel for what is my, let's say, market share. If I look at it per farmer touched, which is just almost non-existent. Now, obviously, when you look at the intensive areas, when you talk to larger farmers, they will all know Bayer, and I have a much higher market share there. But if we assume that the topic of labor shortage, and again, when you look at the COVID situation now, what is the major topic that I hear from farmers? They're not getting labor to help them on the fields, be it for land preparation, be it for spraying, or be it now for harvesting. And this is a continuum. So it's this COVID thing is making it worse. But we do hear over the last couple of years that labor shortage in farming in India is a topic, despite your 1.3 billion people being in the country and a lot of focus still being in agriculture. Also, I believe, and I listened to a very interesting speech by a secretary of finance here, or somebody from the finance administration, was not the minister himself. While you only have the 2.2 to 3% growth, which is, may I say, reported, you know that agriculture in India is in many ways a non-accounted for economical area. So we would say if there's a real 2.3 reported, then probably you're looking at a good double-digit growth happening in terms of really value creation in the agricultural sector, which feeds into other sectors. And when you see also who will be owning apartments in Bombay, you will be finding that a lot of these people actually have a background in agriculture. So agriculture in India is by far not as unprofitable as it is sometimes being projected. Is it profitable enough for the individual farmer is a completely different discussion that we need to have. And this is where, be it the Prime Minister's agenda of doubling the income is absolutely essential. But it's also the question of, okay, how will farming look in future? So is FPOs helping? Is farm mechanization services, even drones, potentially allowing people to own farmland but not have to farm themselves and get income from the farmland while really earning money in the more structured sectors of agriculture? And if Southeast Asia is anything to go by, obviously at a much smaller scale, but when you go to Thailand today, you're going to be finding that most of the farmers that you meet on farm are actually way above the median age. Yeah, and even in India, you will be finding this in many areas that the farmers themselves are rather old, and that the children have, for good governmental practice also over the last years, all have enjoyed education, right? Yes. So we have an 80% plus education percentage also in farming rural India, and many of the kids don't go back into farming. So there is something happening here which will structurally make a difference. I personally don't believe we will see large farm consolidation because people keep the asset, they want to keep the land, and if they don't lose it because of debt or other major, let's say, crises, this will continue to be the case. But you will see more managed farming. And that will, to long answer to a short question, obviously feed into more structured farming, which will allow also for the usage of more may I say, modern methods, and with that probably also more modern chemicals.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have last 10 minutes and we'll take last 2 questions. Shweta, could you go?
Yeah. Hi, Simon. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Shweta.
Yeah. Taking your point about the fake biopesticides, how do you see the government intervention in the area of the pesticide, especially with the new pesticide management bill 2020? And also, how would the organized player like your Bayer benefit at this point of time?
Yeah, I mean, Shweta, you know how it is, and I need to be very careful here. Paper is one thing. Even if you look at the provisions of all the other bills in the past, they weren't necessarily allowing somebody to be selling fake biopesticides with active ingredients in them. Yeah, even if you say there's no regulation around it, if people wanted to test and were testing, they would find there's active substances in there, and they would try to then also find who's producing it. There would be ways and means. So the question is always execution against these bills. The concern lies a little bit, some of the language is very tough, with jail sentences, etc., being called out. History shows that this normally goes against known companies. You very seldom have a small company going up in flames in a big way, but you do see the also existing bills being very actively used against players which are known in the country, and all of us have faced it, be it multinationals, be it locals, where in government tenders also they would be taking the pesticide bill against us if a product would not be working, whether it was used correctly or not. So the concern is, or let's put it this way, it's a good way that the government is re-looking at it, and that generally it is being touted. It is A, recognized that there's a problem, and B, being put on paper that we want to do something against it. Still, fact is, this is not new. This was known, and there would have been ways to go against it in the past. So it'll be interesting to see in how far in future this will be coming in. Personally, I think it's rather the off-takers that will make a difference. Yeah. So if you have somebody like Reliance Fresh setting standards and saying, I will only buy products that do not have residues of pesticide A, B, C, and they test against it, then you're probably going to be finding that farmers will be much more careful at what they use, and with this probably get compliance into the system. I hope, again, long answer to a reasonably short question, but makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anuradha, are you there?
Yeah.
Can you come on with your question? Yes.
Hi, Simon. Simon, we are involved with tea in Assam. So we use a lot of the agrochemicals and pesticides, herbicides, etc. So my question is that, say you use an X amount of molecule, I mean, different chemicals are using, or different brands are using the same amount of molecule in their products, but the efficacy of one is more than the other, like you have different companies. So why is that? That is one. And two, in a price sensitive market like India, how do you address this, that your products are generally more expensive than a lot of the local companies? So why would a company that is using a large number of chemicals buy your products rather than a cheaper one, which would have maybe the same amount of molecule as yours?
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair question. There's a couple of things to it. I mean, first of all, there is quality differences also in the formulations and in the quality control of the products themselves. But what I would like to highlight is, even if you have an identical product, the question is how much support lies behind it. And I was just speaking of my 3,500 people which are out there. We are looking at digital interaction tools. We are using weather data and algorithms to also try to understand when is the best time to apply products. And how do you manage, especially with something like tea, which is an export crop, that you will not have residues later on and potentially have rejections in receiving parts of the world. So there is more to it than just the chemical itself, and that's just important here. With that, basically need to put the cost of the operation onto such a chemical is also clear, and we need to keep in mind that having a research and development behind it, and we have lately launched, I think, 4 or 5 new compounds also in India, then that is part of the story that needs to be financed around it, right? So it's not just the chemical per se. In terms of the differences in performance, it is very important to use them at the right time, in the right quantity, and know when that is. And this is where all the discussion around digital and precision application, which is happening right now increasingly loudly, is going to drive the reduction of chemical usage per se, but also the effectiveness of the used chemical at the right time significantly going forward. Yeah. So these are the things that you always need to keep in mind. There's a lot more behind it than just producing a chemical and selling it to a farmer and walking away, which is normally and shouldn't be Bayer's business model.
Thank you. Simon, can you take one more question?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Pooja Agarwal, can you please come in?
Yeah, hi Simon, Pooja here.
Hi Pooja.
Simon, what are the challenges faced by Bayer in transporting the products in the remote areas of India?
Yeah, today is a very, very big challenge, obviously. But let's say even outside of COVID, this is one of the stories, and I was referring to the 3 million versus the 130 million. Actually, what we're doing with one of our smallholder farming initiatives here is we're opening up what we call Bayer Agri Solution Centers, which is literally retail shops. And when I came here, that was one of the things where I was saying, guys, I don't get it. Why are we building brick and mortar? And that was where I needed to realize that in rural areas of India, actually access to quality agrochemicals is sometimes not a given because there's just no retail shops there. So we are looking at this, and if it becomes successful, we would then look at, is there franchise models or so to really scale it up? Because the last thing I need is Bayer having thousands of retail shops around the country. But it's actually one of the things that we're looking at. Just as well, the whole topic of can you, with digital interactions, and even in India today, When you say farmers themselves, the smartphone adoption may not be so high. If you change the question, you say, do you have a smartphone in the family? You will be finding 80 to 90% at least having that. So how do you enable a farmer when he goes home in the evening to potentially use his daughter's smartphone and say, I have these issues on my farm, and potentially even order products online. So that's where these contacts, again, with people like AgriBazaar or a couple of other sales bureaus, so AgroStar, can become important and actually serving more of rural India than the areas of Nasik or so where you already have an established distribution chain in place.
And then one more small thing I wanted to ask, are you also teaming up with microfinancing companies and helping the farmers to procure the products?
Yeah, I mean, actually, Axis Bank on these agri entrepreneurs centers where we're also looking at, can we maybe work with cash machines? I personally am always a friend of looking into things like Paytm or so. So yes, we are looking at these opportunities. What I'm a little bit wary of is unregulated mini finance things where you look at huge interest rates, because I would rather be working with an off-taker who pre-finances than have a farmer literally take debt onto his balance sheet and then have to deal with the risk of it. Yeah? So we are even talking to NCDX and saying, can we, with derivatives, potentially hedge the loss of prices for farmers, which probably is more for larger farmers, but overall, when you consolidate with FPOs or so, you could deal with also smaller farmers and help them de-risk. Then outright just say, here, take credit to buy an expensive agrochemical, and then leave the risk with them.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was a wonderful session. We as an organization have been following agriculture sector very closely. And thank you for coming in and clearing a lot of our doubts and answering a lot of our questions. I mean, we look forward to your physical presence once the things open up and once we have a chance to meet you. And on behalf of all the members, our mentors, I really deeply express my gratitude to for having spent one of the best 1 hour with us. Thank you so much, Simon.
Thank you, Simon.
So much. It was an honor.
Yeah, thank you. It was a memorable session for all of us. Thank you so much for making it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachna. And do me a favor and send me a little bit of a feedback also if you get any, what we could improve. Or if somebody is very keen on a question to be answered still, then we do a quick follow-up. Okay?
Sure.
We shall. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.